Shalom, I'm Eddie Chumney of Hebraic Heritage Ministries, and we welcome you to this week's Focus Israel Report. In this week's report, we're going to be looking closely at the current status of the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, because the Palestinians are intending at the end of September, at the 66th session of the United Nations, which will be launched in New York, that they want to submit a bid for recognition of a Palestinian state based upon 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. And if they are successful in getting recognition by the United Nations, which would include the United Nations Security Council approving such a measure, it would be a significant end times Bible prophecy event, because the Bible tells us that in the end of days, during the tribulation period, that the nations will divide the land of Israel, Joel chapter 3 and verse 2, and the city of Jerusalem, Zechariah chapter 14 and verse 2. The fulfillment of this would be a Palestinian state based upon 67 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. And the Bible tells us that this dividing of the land of Israel and the city of Jerusalem by the nations happens in a period of time known as the day of the Lord. Joel chapter 1 verse 15, Joel chapter 2 verses 1 and 2, and Zechariah in chapter 14 and verse 1. Now, in order to be a full-fledged member of the United Nations, someone who requests a bid would need the full approval of the United Nations Security Council. The Security Council consists of 15 members, of which 5 are permanent members. The 5 permanent members are Russia, China, Britain, France, and the United States. The 5 permanent members have veto power over any issue that is brought to the United Nations. Currently, the United States is threatening to veto the Palestinian request. And if they do, the Palestinians are stating that they will then go to the United Nations General Assembly. There, at the General Assembly, the Palestinians would need 2/3 of the General Assembly, which is roughly 130 nations, to vote in favor of recognizing a Palestinian state. This would give the Palestinians something greater than what they currently have, which is observer status, but it would be less than full-fledged recognition of a Palestinian state. There is a flurry of diplomatic activity going on regarding this issue, wherein the Palestinians are trying to lobby nations who haven't yet committed regarding how they're going to vote, trying to get them to support a Palestinian state at the United Nations, wherein Israel is lobbying equally as hard to try to get nations to not vote for a Palestinian state. It is the position of the United States and the European Union as well that they would like to see the resumption of direct peace talks between the Palestinians and Israel. The United States and the European Union, they are trying to come up with an acceptable formula to restart talks, and in doing so trying to persuade the Palestinians from submitting their bid to the United Nations for recognition of a Palestinian state. However, the Palestinians are saying that they are going to go ahead and submit their bid, which they could do so as early as September the 20th. The Palestinians are eager to have recognition of a Palestinian state, given that last September, the President of the United States, Barack Obama, at the United Nations expressed expressed his desire that he would like to see a Palestinian state in September of 2011. And the quartet, which are the overseers and the mediators of the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, the quartet consisting of the United States, the European Union, the United Nations, and Russia, they have also stated that they would like to see a Palestinian state this September. And the Palestinians were instructed 2 years ago in 2009, were told that they had 2 years to be ready for statehood. And the Palestinians are saying that they indeed are ready, and the institutions for a state are in place. The Palestinians are feeling frustrations regarding the peace talks because their position is they would like to see Israel to halt all settlement building in the West Bank and suspend building in East Jerusalem before they could enter into peace talks with Israel. Meanwhile, Israel is saying that in order to have constructive peace talks with the Palestinians, that the Palestinians need to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. There needs to be a guarantee of Israel's security, and Israel feels that it needs to have a military presence in the Jordan Valley, and Israel would like to annex the large settlement blocks, and they are willing to swap land with the Palestinians to keep these large settlement blocks. Because of the insistence of both sides regarding their positions, there has been a lack of direct talks between both sides, and the United States and Europe are trying to revive those talks. Tony Blair will be making another trip to the Middle East. Tony Blair is the spokesperson for the quartet. He is going to try to get the two sides to return to peace negotiations. Mahmoud Abbas states that he is going to go forward regardless to seek recognition of a Palestinian state at the United Nations, and he says that if the United Nations will recognize a state, that he will enter into direct negotiations to resolve the details of setting up and establishing a Palestinian state based upon 67 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. So in the past several weeks, China, Spain, as well as India, El Salvador, and Honduras have said that they will vote to recognize a Palestinian state at the United Nations. Right now, there are about 124 countries who have committed themselves to recognize a Palestinian state at the United Nations, and the Palestinians believe that ultimately when the final vote is taken, they can have as many as 140 to 150 UN member states vote to recognize a Palestinian state. They only need about 130 countries to be recognized by the UN General Assembly. U.S. President Barack Obama will go to the United Nations for the General Assembly meetings in New York between September the 19th and the 21st is when he is expected to be there. Mahmoud Abbas is expected to give a speech at the United Nations September the 23rd. Regarding the European position, Europe seems to be the battleground over a Palestinian state. French President Nicolas Sarkozy says that he would like all 27 member nations of the European Union to vote with one voice regarding this issue. However, the challenge is that the European Union member states are divided on the Palestinian statehood issue. we have then within the European Union that a number of European Union countries are expected to support a Palestinian state, and they would include France as well as England, Belgium, Cyprus, Greece, Ireland, Malta, Portugal, Spain, and Sweden. Some of the other countries not mentioned are leaning to vote against support for a Palestinian state. And the European Union has been working with the Palestinians regarding the actual wording of the text that may be presented to the United Nations, because the European Union believes that with proper wording of the request, there may be the possibility that the 27 European Union member nations can vote as one bloc on the issue. Meanwhile, in Israel, they are discussing what may be their reaction should there be a positive vote at the United Nations. And they're discussing a variety of measures, but there is an internal debate within Israel whether it would be wise to submit and to declare the Israeli position before the UN vote or respond to it afterwards. And so no actual decision has been made, at least formally and publicly, regarding what would be the Israeli response should the UN General Assembly at least vote to support the recognition of a Palestinian state. One of the Israeli demands regarding direct negotiations is that Israel be recognized as a Jewish state. However, Mahmoud Abbas has repeated his long-held position that the Palestinians will not recognize Israel as a Jewish state. The next several weeks is critical before we have the start of the United Nations General Assembly meetings beginning September the 20th in New York to see exactly will the United States and Europe be successful in trying to prevent the Palestinians from going to the United Nations and submitting their request to be recognized as a Palestinian state. Palestinians continue to insist that they will do this despite pressure coming from the United States, the European Union, and Israel. And then if the request is actually submitted, what is going to be the language of the text? Because depending upon the language could determine how certain member states, especially European member states, vote. If the Palestinians would word the text that is close to the position of the United States, will the United States then veto the request like they're insisting that they're going to do? Or could the wording that United States could support, would they then be willing to either abstain or vote for recognition of the state? And then once we have the United Nations vote, what's going to be the reaction in Israel? And the Palestinians are planning protests. Israel is concerned about these protests getting out of hand, and so Israel has been in talks with the Palestinian Authority regarding coordinating security at the time of these protests. We're going to continue to watch, wait, and see how things develop in this area and what actually will take place at the end of this month, that is, the month of September, regarding the Palestinians' desire to see the United Nations recognize them as a state based upon 67 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. Until we bring you next week's report, Shalom in Yeshua the Messiah. Amen.